Some years ago, I was on a trip speaking to Muslim background students, kind of cultural Muslims in Bosnia, right outside Sarajevo. I'd never been to the Balkans. The Balkans is a very confusing world, and the former Yugoslavia is made up of Croatians, Bosnians, and Serbs. The Croatians, I'm painting with a broad brush here, are nominal Catholics by and large. The Bosnians are what I would call nominal Muslims, kind of a folk Islam. And the Serbs are by and large a strange combination of Eastern Orthodox faith and nationalism. It is a strange, strange country. And every 50 years or so, they kill each other. I met a woman named Anissa, Muslim background believer who met Jesus. So this is for free. I think I have time. Yeah. Just to tell you how this wonderful young woman became a believer, I said, how'd you meet Jesus? You know, she had never heard the name Jesus, nothing about it. And she says, well, I was watching Ben-Hur, the movie, you know, the old movie. I'm like, yeah, that's real spiritual. And she said there was a scene in Ben-Hur where there was a man on the cross. I didn't know his name and I didn't know who he was, but I'd had dreams about him for years. And when I saw that in the movie, I knew that that was the man that was going to change my life. And from there, she met Christ. It was just like, ooh, one of those interesting moments. Well, I said to her, as a young woman growing up in Sarajevo, brand new Christian, coming out of a Muslim background, what was it like? And I was totally unprepared for her answer. She said, well, after I met Jesus, I prayed every day for many, many years that I wouldn't be raped by the Serbian soldiers. Trouble. I drove about 4 hours to Vukovar, Croatia. Vukovar, Croatia is one of the places where some of the worst atrocities took place during the war in the early 90s. And I was to preach in a small church there. And I was standing there, and about as far as where I am to the back of the gym, how many yards that is, 60, 70 yards, there was a bakery that was all boarded up. And I'm standing outside before we go inside for this church service, and I say to the pastor, I said, well, what's up with the bakery that's all boarded up? He said, well, just a few years ago, the Serbs came and attacked, and they killed on a hot August morning about 200 people. Slaughtered them, men, women, children. And we didn't know what to do with the bodies, and so the Serbs took the bodies into that bakery and put them in the ovens to get rid of the bodies. There was no tractors to dig holes. And we're standing right in the street, and he says the blood ran inches deep right where you're standing. And he says, by the way, the people that you'll be preaching to this morning in just a few minutes, many of them were there that morning and somehow survived this horrible event. Trouble. You know that this Sunday is International Day of Prayer for the Persecuted Church. And at our church, we're going to have about a 12, 15-minute testimony from a man named Joseph Bondarenko, who was a Ukrainian Baptist pastor who spent 9 years in prison because he loved Jesus. I had lunch with him a few weeks ago, and I said, what? And I'm just speechless to be with a real live persecuted person like this. And I said, what was the worst thing? And he said, well, the worst thing, and he was tortured, he was brutalized. He said the worst thing, and his eyes filled with tears because at the table that we were having lunch with was his adult son, is he says, for 9 years I never saw my son grow up. Trouble. In the world, you'll have trouble. A little closer to home. A few years ago, one of the drummers in our worship team at church, young guy, early 30s, beautiful wife, little tiny daughter, physically fit dude, develops a brain tumor and dies. Trouble. I'm on vacation with my family in Montana, and I get a phone call from another friend. And I recognize his voice. He hardly greets me, and he says, hey, Steve, I think my wife is having an affair. And I begin to laugh and joke and be silly because it seems so implausible to me that this could happen. This was a guy I knew well who we'd had for dinner and our families had intermingled with, and it was true. And his marriage and life in our church was rocked. I have a small discipleship group with men in our church, older men. And every week I meet with a man who's in his 80s who prays about traumatic stress that he has in his life, post-traumatic stress syndrome. And he's been praying this prayer for 60 years because of things he saw in the Korean War that have haunted him since he was a young guy. And then the next man who's just contracted Parkinson's and the next guy who late in life is having his home foreclosed on. Trouble. In the world, you'll have trouble. And now really closer to home. You know those perfect kids I told you about that my wife and I wanted to have when we were just a young married couple? Well, we had 2 beautiful daughters. They're awesome. But when my youngest daughter was 18 months old, I'll spare you the details, but we discovered a grapefruit-sized tumor in her body. She was so tiny, I thought, how does it even fit in there? And we spent a week at Children's Hospital in Los Angeles thinking that she would not make it. She did. Fast forward about 17 years. She's a freshman at Point Loma University in San Diego. And lo and behold, the tumor shows up again. And she has 3 life-threatening surgeries that totally change her life. Trouble. I know that many of you probably worship at Reality in Carp. It's very similar to what the Merrick family is going through with Daisy right now. Same story. The similarities are astounding. We wanted to have kids that were really obedient, but we had a daughter who developed drug abuse and drug dependency in extreme rebellion through high school. Our world was rocked. I wept in front of our church. My wife and I didn't think we could go on. Well, I could tell many, many more stories, and I'm not going to, but you get the point. In the world, you'll have trouble. Now, somebody today is going to go outside, and you're going to go back to your dorms, and you're going to talk to somebody who said, oh, what was chapel like? I had to study for a test, or I was busy. And you're going to say that there's some little pastor guy from town that came, and man, he was really a downer. He told us all these really sad stories. I want you to know, I'm a really happy guy. My glass is half full. I love life. I love a good party. I love to laugh. I'm a good time. But in the world, you will have trouble. Do you have a faith that will sustain you when trouble comes into your life? We don't know when it will come. We don't know with what intensity it will come, but it will come. Jesus was clear. The scriptures are clear. The New Testament is full of phrases like, have great patience and endurance. Endure hardship as a good soldier of Christ. Paul speaks, we're almost amazed at this in 2 Corinthians, of our light and momentary afflictions. He says, join me in suffering for the gospel. The phrase in the book of Revelation comes up over and over again, to those who overcome. Who overcome what? Trouble. My wife and I love to backpack in the Sierras and in the Rockies, and it struck me this summer on a trip that backpacking is an awful lot like the Christian life. There are good times when you backpack, and there's trouble. You work hard for hours in the sun and the heat, and you sweat, and to get to that 10,000-foot lake, and you go, what a blessing. Only to be swarmed by mosquitoes. Parenthetically, there's only 2 great theological questions left to be answered. Why gophers and why mosquitoes? Those are my questions. Sometimes the hiking is uphill and difficult, and sometimes the hiking is downhill and easy. Sometimes the weather is clear and warm, and sometimes it's rainy and windy and cold and miserable. And just like our lives, life, like hiking, brings varied terrain and different types of conditions. And like life, hiking in the backcountry brings the unexpected. Are you spiritually prepared for the uphills and the downhills of the Christian life? Now, you might think it's time in my little talk here to make some suggestions on how you can handle trouble in your Christian life. Develop a defense of why bad things happen to God's people, what theologians call theodicy. 3 points. Clever, pithy, help you as you go.